Welcome to Politics and Tactics. We got a great show for you tonight. Tonight, we have the individual on this show whose name's been spoken of more than any other person, but yet she's never appeared. PJ, can you introduce our two great distinguished guests?
Yeah, absolutely, Frank. And we're one of those two that will actually introduce her and talk about our friend Diane in a positive note. But we all know that she's not always been a fan favorite of everybody's, but that's what makes her so special, and that's what brings our bond with her so well. So, for those of you probably in the fire service, you've been living under a rock. If you don't know our first guest, Diane Cotter tonight. Diane's been a longtime friend of our show, and she is the reason, I'm repeating that, why you know or have heard of PFAS in your firefighting gear. She is the one that has broke that for the fire service. She's the one that took that from a personal endeavor of hers to find out why her husband has cancer or had cancer, in trying to put the points together. And she figured out that our turnout gear has PFAS, and she elevated that to every state, every country, every fire department that we know is because of Diane. So she's been a longtime friend of ours. We've had her on our show before. Tonight's going to be a little bit different. We're not going to really be focusing on specifically the PFAS because she has a friend of hers with her tonight, Miranda. Miranda spent the last 20 years as an editor and reporter for the Washington Post, where she's an editor or was an editor on the Metro desk. She designed groundbreaking plan for local news coverage that resulted in deep coverage of undercovered communities in the District of Maryland and Virginia. While at the Post, Miranda won several journalism awards, including first place for local government reporting in 2013 from the Maryland, Delaware, D.C. Press Association. Her series, State Secrets from RevealNews.org, forms the basis of her new book that will be published in 2025, which is about the underreported rise in state and local secrecy seen through the eyes of 5 accidental activists who are confronted with barriers to information, will find a way to overcome them and bring important change to their communities. And that's how I believe that the bond has been created between Miranda and Diane, because Diane is that activist. She's that one that brought something to us in the fire service that will impact every single one of us and our families and future generations of firefighters by being outspoken, going against all odds, going against everybody who said that she was just a crazy lunatic and had no idea what she was talking about. However, we know now that Diane has been right all along. So we welcome both of you to the show tonight. We're really looking forward to having this conversation. And, Diane, for those that haven't heard of you, briefly, just explain, summarize your involvement and what got you here on this show for, I think this is the third or fourth time now.
So I started to ping you and Frank and Bobby Halton very publicly and often privately about getting involved in this issue. And one day I was sparring with Bobby Halton online, and he challenged me. He said, "I'm not hard to find, Diane Cotter," and he threw his phone number onto a Facebook page, and I called and we talked for 2 hours, and Bobby and PJ and Frank came to our rescue when we were fighting for space in the fire service media. We had a great viral article with John Marr of Station Pride, The Real Cancer in Your Gear, but we couldn't break into the mainstream media, and we did that with you guys.
Yeah, well, we're really happy to help you elevate your message, and we're just two small pieces of that whole puzzle that's brought your name to a common name in the fire service, and we're grateful for that. And Miranda, welcome to our show tonight. Why don't you tell everybody a little about yourself and about your upcoming book and your relationship with Diane, and kind of what brings you here tonight.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So I've always been interested in local stories, local news, and don't get me started on my alma mater and other big news organizations that have basically given up on local news, because it's really harmful, I think, to our country, harmful to people's ability to become involved in issues in their communities, and it's just very, very sad. But anyway, my entire background as a journalist has been really state and local. And I think partly because it's ignored in a lot of ways by large news organizations. I I also had found that there was secrecy growing at the state and local level, and nobody was really writing about it. And I did write about it after I left the Post. I went and did this series that you mentioned, State Secrets, which is of course, a double meaning, for Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. And after I did that, I thought, I didn't think for a while that there was a book in it. And then I did begin to think that there was a book in it. And so what I started to do in 2019 is look around the country, because I knew the experiences that I had had as a reporter in the Washington area had to be being replicated elsewhere, and not just by journalists, but by real people who were trying to do things in their communities and having a very tough time getting information. So, that's really how I found Diane. She had a website, an early stage website, I would say. But it was interesting, she was talking about her issue, and this is early 2020, I believe. Does that fit with your memory, Diane? I haven't actually
I thought it was even in 2019, Miranda.
Could be. I don't know. I had found Michael Hickey in late 2019. He's another
Mhm.
PFAS activist, and my book isn't all about PFAS, but there are two examples in there about PFAS. Well, it was somewhere around there, late 2019 or early 2020, so it's quite a while ago. And of course, then we had COVID and other things getting in the way of life. But I was very interested in what she was doing, and we did talk. And Diane is high school educated and not an investigator, and yet she was figuring out all these really remarkable things early on, and then struggling to get politicians and people in power, including in the firefighters union, to pay attention to her.
Miranda, I love correcting journalists. She is an investigator.
Yeah.
If there was anybody on the planet where first they ignore you, then they attack you, then they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then next they take on your ideas like they were your own, it's been Diane Cotter. So
Well,
I agree with everything you're saying, but you want something done in America, ask a mom.
well, that's true too, and I'm a mom.
Mhm.
um, But my point, Frank, was that she had no previous experience as an investigator, and I think that's true. And she became one, and that's like the other people in the book too. They're all what I would call, civilians, if you will, who aren't in this business. They're not in the business I'm in, which is investigation, and they learn how to do this, and it's out of passion and anger, and just a feeling like there's something wrong, and they think that they can fix it, and that's very, very challenging, but very, very, very admirable. So Diane is one of five people in this book. The others are in other parts of the country, dangerous roads, a horrible sewer case in Alabama. I mean, there's all kinds of really, what I would call kitchen table issues. And all of these people learn by doing, and it's just been amazing to me to see how much they've been able to accomplish. And of course, Diane's story, which is just remarkable, and she still doesn't quite acknowledge that. I think she doesn't. I think see how extraordinary the accomplishments that she's achieved are.
I absolutely agree because when she started, everybody was standing in her way and everybody was trying to make her appear like she had a tinfoil hat on. And they were just afraid of the question even being asked. And that's one of the issues that we have in America right now. Is a lot of reporters want to repeat talking points from the administration instead of questioning them.
Well, I think that, I mean, I don't want this to be all about how reporters are failing, because I think, there are many who aren't. But what I find just amazing is how people out in, the world, in their communities, are really fighting, I think, to fill the gap that the decline of local news has left. I mean, who's going to be the watchdog. If it's not there at 11:30 when the city council is making all its really important decisions after everybody's gone home, and reporters used to be there, so who's going to be around? It's now people I'm calling accidental activists. They don't sign up for this. They didn't want to do this. It's very hard. It takes a huge personal toll. And you're right. I mean, all kinds of people in power come after you, whether it's corporations or politicians or whatever, to try to discredit you. And you really have to stand firm. And, it's hard.
Now, Diane, I think the beginning of this story, the individuals that push back the most, and while there has been a complete 180, which we celebrate, was the unions that were supposed to be the watchdogs were the ones that were actually being walked by the chemical companies, and they were
Gotcha.
basically stifling those hard questions. Can you kind of speak a little bit
Sure.
about that? Now,
Sure.
all of a sudden, history's being rewritten to be that the unions were the heroes in this. They can be the heroes in it now, as they should be, but they weren't there in the very beginning.
This is true. It was a very long, difficult road. You saw it, and we make no. I'm very vocal still about holding that line for everyone's involvement. I think that the truth to this journey is so important so that we don't repeat it. But that's, there's no hiding who the actors were. In my case, my greatest nemesis was Harold Schaitberger. And what you'll probably see in Miranda's book, and certainly in my upcoming memoir, Products of Deception, is that there were actual actions taken by Harold, who really orchestrated players and his soldiers to ghost this issue, and fully orchestrated some people to make, as Bobby Halton said, vicious attacks to vilify me. So if you want to know what that looks like, when I found out that it was Lion Gear's John Granby, Vice President of Corporate Responsibility, that was chiding Bobby Halton to go with him to a meeting in the IAFF back in 2020, I think it was, or maybe it was 2019. Once I got word of who that was, I then formed a letter and sent it off to the executive board of the union. And I didn't get a reply from a formal reply from the union acknowledging that had taken. I was getting messages from two of my strongest supporters way back then. And one was Ricky Walsh. The other was Ed Kelly. I can't speak for them, but I can tell you what I was picking up from them. They wanted me to hold the line because that administration was not going to take this issue on. Well, you didn't need to tell me that, because I was living it. I was living it to the extent that I was bullying people strongly online, and I was being bullied online. When I would produce documentation of things, I would be told that I was an attention seeker, et cetera, et cetera. I think we saw that from the Boston legislative agent, and I had a good go round. Not the current one, certainly no. This was during the years of what we call the shunning, which was also what Harold did. Was he did send out an order to his soldiers to shun us, to shun Paul and I. And shunning is very personal. It's like you're friends with everybody one day and they can't talk to you the next day. But in my world, it was much bigger than that, because it was legislative work that we were working on, both nationally and locally in Massachusetts and in many New England states. And that took its toll on me physically. Um, mentally, I was going through a lot. Mentally, I was considering suicide. And I can tell you what that looks like. I'll tell you what that looks like for someone like myself. The day that I considered taking my life, there was much time leading up to that, and I had envisioned how I would do it, etc. One of the things that I prepared for was who will take over while I'm gone, because this is too much for me now, and I can't do it anymore. And it wore me down. And I confided in my dearest ally, firefighter Jeffrey Kanabe. He was our Alameda County firefighter, our PPE specialist. And I may have to take a huge secret to the grave to me if he doesn't reveal it himself someday. But I will tell you, he is the reason why we got this study off the ground with Dr. Graham Peasley. He is the reason. But I told him I was considering, after a particularly difficult night, I told him I was considering taking my life. And I said, I'm going to make you administrator of my pages and social media and everything. And it shocked him. It shocked him. And, we had a long conversation that day, by phone. And he asked if he could tell Paul. And I asked him not to, because I never wanted Paul to look at me like I was weak. So what that looks like for someone like me, who is the face of an action, is I put up a post on Facebook, on my Facebook page and all my pages, social media, meet your new admin, Jeff Kanabe. So that's what that looks like. Yeah. And, the actions rolled on for so long. We were still growing the Army throughout all of this. And, I had great allies that could maneuver with me, like Jimmy McGovern and Senator Shaheen. And, I had great allies that were working along this. But the shield for 5 years for me was Harold Schaitberger. And in my upcoming memoir, you're going to see everything, because I'll sugarcoat nothing, not even my bad acts.
Diane, for being one of those, individuals on the sidelines who watched this from the very beginning, I've seen, and I've talked to you at some highs, I've talked to you at some lows. I know you and I and Frank and you have had some courageous conversations, and sometimes we just told you, just have some patience.
Oh, yeah.
Pump the brakes a little bit, because you wanted action today, and Frank and I were able to see that you would accomplish that, but there was times that you just had to slow down a little bit, and you listened to us, and I'm grateful that you decided not to take your life. That would have been devastating for your husband, for your son, for Frank and I, and the entire fire service. So I'm grateful for Jeff and whatever those conversations were that reversed that course. But on this show, we try to relate this to the fire service, and your story, while it impacts the fire service, there's a lot of relations here. I've been in leadership positions for 20 years now. Frank has been in leadership positions. He has a best-selling fire engineering book on leadership, and you have displayed this leadership, but you've also learned the hard parts of leadership. It's usually always, glitter and rainbows, and, you have some challenges, but very few people understand how you sacrifice yourself as a leader, especially under tumultuous conditions, and trying to accomplish what you have accomplished. There's many great leaders that go through what you have gone through, but don't see the success because they continue to get stonewalled. And I saw that turn come, and, Bobby Halton was a great advocate of yours, and opening up the doors of fire engineering and giving you a platform, and having Frank and I, which I remember that first time we had you on the show, we didn't know how it was going to go. We didn't know what hate mail we were going to get, because we were hearing already from some of those in the fire service that you weren't the person that should be speaking about this. You didn't know what you were talking about, and Frank and I and Bobby, we took that risk because we trusted you. We trusted what you were telling us, and I'm grateful that we did. But what lessons do you have for the fire service leadership who are out there working the streets today that may have a challenging situation that they're trying to push forward, and they're reaching those issues? They're being stonewalled, they're being stopped because you never stopped. You continue to push, right? And there's a
I was
balance there, and you have some lessons that you can offer some of the fire service leadership as well.
You folks are in an awful position because you have a chain of command. I had no chain of command. And I used my social media to that advantage. But I didn't just use social media to attack. I used social media to educate. And I would connect the dots and put that on social media. So any firefighter can do that if they're facing a challenge as well. You don't have to step out of your line of command if you're talking about something that is happening that you're seeing. You can post educational posts. You have to be very careful. I know the way things work in the fire service. You step out of line, it's going to be hell to pay. But you can't be silent. You could say for anything, say that that in your building there is something very wrong within the health of the building. You bring it up to your leadership and they dismiss you. You go to the newspaper and you find those articles that are written about something similar, and you start elevating your with your common sense points. What I ended up doing was building myself a Medium blog where I would delve deep into the NFPA, delve deep into the connections between bad players and money, and articles that were written such as The Scheme. Look that up, or the Lion Gear timeline. Bolo. I can look back at this now, but you should look up the NFPA and conflicts of interest article that I wrote. Or speaking about leadership, when you think about the NFPA, we know it was the NFPA that was back in the 70s, filling up the voting committees for the foam with the manufacturers that were, making the AFFF, the poisonous AFFF. What the NFPA might not have known then is that 3M already had devised a blueprint, if you will, to infiltrate the fire service. Well, how do you think they did that? The NFPA. You can read about that. It's all on my Medium. I connected all the dots for you.
Yeah, and you absolutely did, and and I know you mentioned the unions, and I'll just throw one more thing out there, and then get Frank's input on it and his thoughts. Ed Kelly was one that was very influential, well before he was the president in his current position, in helping you navigate some of those uncharted waters. Now he's been an advocate since he's taken over the presidency, and leading the IAFF and the membership out of some of the problems. Not all, but some of the problems. He is a big organization that he's trying to navigate. So I don't want our listeners who are advocates of the IAFF to feel that you're just beating up the IAFF on talking about Shadesburg.
Never.
He didn't do anything. But I know Ed Kelly has been a supporter of yours, and he's been trying.
He's my hero.
Right the ship.
He's my hero.
Yep, Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, my role in this was so small. I was just basically on the sideline and just helping magnify Diane's voice. I mean, this was all Diane. I mean, to quote the famous philosopher, the Mad Hatter, in Alice in Wonderland, when you step out on that board to face the creature, you're alone. And I think that Diane saw that. And I think Miranda can speak a little bit to that with these 5 individuals knew that the right thing was going to be the hard thing. And yet they stepped out alone. And then it's everybody else at the end that jumps on. When you look back now, it's easy to say, oh, this was such a great fight and it's so great that we're all together. But that's never how these things start off. Miranda, do you want to speak to that a little? Because I think there's probably that common thread in your book with these 5 individuals is that these 5 individuals had the persistence, the tenacity to say that I'm not going to just put my head in the sand and say this is somebody else's job, because if that happens, it never gets done. And, to your credit, I'm not like hammering all reporters, because it takes that courageous reporter to finally get the story out. And we need quality reporting in America. I mean, it's something that this country needs, and I applaud you for this book coming out. Can you speak a little to that thread?
Well, you're absolutely right that there is a sort of recurring theme among all 5 people. Everybody in a different way ultimately realizes they can't go it alone, because there is much greater strength in numbers, and that's when politicians hear firefighters saying our gear is poisoned, do something about it, and it's not just one person from Worcester, now from New Hampshire, it's lots of people getting worried. I mean, numbers matter to elected officials and frankly to the manufacturers and everybody else. So, they do go it alone for a while and then ultimately learn to build, their own community and their own sort of allies, as Diane said. Diane was a remarkable user of Facebook, for instance. I mean, really was able to use that in, I think, very creative ways that probably even Facebook hasn't thought about. But that's, and that's sort of now, I mean, if you talk to my daughters who are in their 30s, Facebook, well, that's passe, but it's not. It's a huge communications tool that people are able to use, find allies around the country, people with the same or similar issue, fighting something. And so, yeah, I mean, I think yes, they go it alone, but then ultimately they have to build a coalition and do. And that's hard too, because coalitions fracture and there's competition within coalitions. And, people don't like everybody's style. And, they say this person shouldn't be speaking for me. And yet they're all on the same issue and the same side. But so it's very hard work. I have to say, it is very hard work. So but you're absolutely right. There is sort of a unifying thread, I think, among people who are in this accidental activism world. And they're all over the country. I mean, I picked out 5, but there are many, many people trying to do this kind of work on some issue, not necessarily firefighter turnout gear, but on some issue that's very important. Drinking water is a huge problem around the country. Sewage is a huge problem around the country. And then, one other thing that I was struck by when you all were just talking was that, you get the fire service or the union, and you get the politicians, and you get the corporations, and they all sort of see themselves on the same team, when in fact, there should be skepticism about, certainly, I think, the union, which has changed on this issue, but, they should have been skeptical about why do you think the manufacturers are saying that they're protecting you? I mean, to me, that's that right there. There's, really? I mean, they're in it to make money. Many politicians are in it to stay in office. So, they make all kinds of compromises and coalitions that don't necessarily take into account the interest of their constituents.
Can I add to that, Miranda? That was one of the difficulties about the early opening up navigation channels for this issue is I didn't know what a coalition was. I didn't know what a collaboration was. I knew none of that. But I was reaching out to Jimmy McGovern, who I know I drove absolutely crazy, but he knew what was happening to me in the union because I attended a meeting in DC and told him one day what was happening. I mean, I got to spill it because it's all coming, it's all coming in the memoir. And he was devastated and devastated. But that was, the early years. And what he did was, without stepping on anyone's toes, he joined the PFAS, the Congressional PFAS Task Force, which is strongly bipartisan. We have the fabulous Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. I want to say he's a rep. I hope I don't get that wrong.
Yeah, he's a Republican rep.
Republican, and he's, oh my God, I remember talking to him one day in Washington, D.C. He was just flabbergasted by all of this. He's on there. Dan Kildee, Michigan rep, who's retiring, I think, at the end of the term in November. So the support was there. Senator Shaheen, who saw it, was going on. I got a funny story about that for you. The NIST study that I saw Harold take credit for that absolutely blew me out of my chair, and I had to light up about 75 flaming arrows on that day. But they worked outside of the parameters without having to say, what are you doing about this? They saw what was going on because I was testifying as to what was going on with the Shapeberger administration. And I cannot hide that. I cannot undo that. I cannot fix that for anybody. If you were a part of that and I saw it, you're going to be part of this story. Even as friends today, I can't undo your role in this.
Miranda, in your investigative, style of, finding these 5 accidental activists, what pitfalls have you seen, and what positive traits have you seen? Like, what if you have somebody out there listening today that's, they're in it for their issue that they truly believe in? What would you tell them not to do, and what would you tell them that they should be doing?
It's a good question. I need to ponder that a little bit. Um, I think people get into an issue and they don't recognize, first of all, how much time it's going to take, and it's hugely consuming. Usually, it's writing letters to your congressman. It's trying to figure out who in government might actually be able to help you. Diane spent a lot of time. I was looking at my manuscript the other day that, it took her several days often to understand one chemical term or one scientific term. The amount of self-education that you have to do is enormous. So you have to figure out how you're going to spend this time and not lose your life and not stop taking care of your kids and going to your job and all of that, but somehow how to balance that. And it's hard, and it becomes very consuming because people are angry and they're frustrated, and they're thinking, why can't I solve this? And so I think you have to recognize the odds are you're in it for the long haul, or the issue is going to take a long time to resolve. It's not going to happen overnight, and you sort of have to pace yourself. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that's very hard for people is the frustration level. It can get very, very high, and I totally get that. I'm not criticizing that. I think that's understandable. You hit so many brick walls and so many information blockades and so many people. A lot of what I was looking at was how people were trying to get information from their government, state and local. And there are people there who want to do good, but there are also people there who perhaps, like the fire service, it's hierarchical, and if you give out information you're going to be punished for it. And so you're reluctant to talk to the public, and then these activists, people get very angry. They really feel dissed, and they feel like nobody's paying attention to them, and it's my tax dollars that paid for this. How come, whatever the issue is, how come I can't get relief? and then they lose it, and then that harms their cause because they look shrill, they look angry, they look they look like they're unreasonable. Jim McGovern, I interviewed him about Diane, and he said he was all, I'm paraphrasing now because I don't have the exact words in front of me, but he was on the one hand terrified of her and on the other hand admired her. And, he also was angry that, government hadn't responded and the union hadn't responded quickly enough. But, she could be very intimidating without even realizing it, I think. That's my interpretation. But and that's tricky. Sometimes you need to be intimidating. But also you need to sort of be very, very patient, and it's hard to do in when there's an issue. Your kid is drinking poisoned water or whatever it is. It's very hard to be patient.
Mhm.
Yeah, we know it's a challenge when Frank and I are telling Diane to have patience, because Frank and I have none, and we were telling her to have some patience. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember that conversation. I remember I got a call one night from Bobby, and he was not happy with me. He was not happy with me at all because I hurt someone that he loved very much. And the next day, my phone is in a three-way conversation with this party that I wounded. And that party and I are like this right now.
Well, you can't make peace unless you make war. So
Yeah.
you're gonna offend some people in any of the process. One
Mhm.
of the things that I think is a common theme with leadership and in these types of situations, and it's usually when people start self-doubting themselves the most, is when as soon as they start attacking you as an individual without attacking the issue on its
You've
merits,
always
that's
said that.
when you know you're asking the right questions. You may not be 100%, but if they just start attacking you without defending the merits of the issue, that means you're on the right path. And that means you need to push harder, not step back.
Mhm.
PJ?
Yeah,
One thing I would say also about that is, as a journalist, I don't expect people to love me or even like me. Um, but I had colleagues, I worked in a newsroom. There were other people in the same situation that I was in, where I was getting berated by the county executive or yelled at by the police chief or whatever. Diane and her fellow accidental activists, they may have allies, but they don't really have colleagues who are sort of really having a shared experience with them. And that also, I think, makes it very hard.
And Frank, and he won't tell you a lot of these stories, but I was one of the sitting on the sideline watching a lot of the stories of his challenges and some of his fights, and he always attacked the issue head on. He never went after any individual, but to the point where he won't tell you unless you ask him. But as union president, he had a gun pulled on him by one of his own members because they were starting to attack him, even though they wouldn't go after the issue because Frank was right on the issues, but they have pulled a gun on him, right? So you're talking to somebody who has shown leadership, who has gone down these roads as well, just fighting the issues. And Frank has never attacked anyone. But Diane, I'd like to go backwards a little bit on the PFAS issue because we're at like that 30, 40 minute or so. What update do you have for the fire service? So
What?
are we making progress on
Yes.
PFAS free turnout gear? Are we making progress on getting that in the hands and on the backs and shoulders of the firefighters on the streets? And where do we stand on that? Can you give the fire service an update?
Sure. So you've had PFAS-free outer shell material by Safety Component. That's your DWR. I know that because I know that they worked with Dr. Peasley to make sure that was PFAS-free. So the correct way to order your outer shell or your outer shell is to, order it with the DWR that we know Dr. Peasley had a hand in. There are others out there. I don't know that they are PFAS free because they didn't verify with Dr. Peasley, which is the only name that I feel that we should trust at this point in time. The other thing is that your your moisture barrier came out this year at FDIC. I think you guys were there at the announcement, and that is PFAS free. and I know that Dr. Peasley also was able to verify that as well. But what I don't know is the other components of it, what makes it now PFAS free. This is my lane. I was just in the PFAS lane, so I'm not, a PPE expert. So you do have the options. They're very few. They're very far between. I don't know how hard it is to order. I think you better be very careful if you're ordering, that you state things specifically that you want. Jeff Kanabe, PPE specialist, he can help you with that out in Alameda County, California. But I know that President Kelly is pushing for new PPE, next generation PPE. I've heard him speak on this. I heard him speak on this in Washington, where he's saying, I hope I don't misquote this, but do we need to be in a fire for so long? I don't know. That's your lane, that you guys have to investigate that. But he is pushing for the studies to develop next generation PPE. You've got a lot of legislation coming through. You've got Debbie Dingell's legislation that's working on next generation PPE. You've got Senator Cory Booker's PFAS Act that will give firefighters like Paul, who was the face of the PFAS lawsuit, but is now voluntarily told for 4 years until prostate cancer catches up with the science. Senator Cory Booker's act is going to give money to firefighters with these cancers by taxing the gear manufacturers, which I love. And then there was the Senator Gary Peters PFAS Act of 2019 that I don't think he even knows this, but my dear friend activist Kristen Mello and I coordinated to meet with his aide, and that's why you have PFAS and PPE in that act that is signed and is through, is because we held the line on that in 2019. The union wasn't on board with this. They were promoting the work of Line Gear. But and then you also have the NIST study from Senator Shaheen, which is a great 4-year study. So in Massachusetts and Connecticut, our 2 states, Frank, were first to pass the complete total sundown of PFAS and turnout gear. I think Massachusetts is going to be 2027. I think Connecticut is 2028. I've already had a number of states reach out to me to ask to work with them. So you're going to see this go nationwide.
Yeah.
And one thing that's, PJ, one thing that's really interesting about this is that the reason that the market has responded with innovation, with putting out this PFAS gear, is because a needless regulation that was supposedly there to protect us was removed from NFPA to allow the market to innovate. And I think a lot of the public have a misunderstanding, is that every time they see a government regulation, they think it's automatically there to help them. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes there's unintended consequences. But I'm going to go to Miranda on this, because I think we've seen this in the computer industry as well. Sometimes government regulations aren't there because they want to help. Sometimes they're put there by captured bureaucratic agencies that want to actually limit competition in the free market and give certain companies an advantage over others. So in this gear situation, it was a UV light test that once that regulation was put to the side, now the companies were able to innovate, competition spread, and now we're moving to PFAS gear. Miranda, do you want to weigh in on the regulations?
You're raising an interesting issue, because the whole structure of how safety gear for firefighters is set up is really through this private nonprofit. It's not the government. The government, accepts their recommendations, and there are government people on those panels. There are also firefighters on those panels. There are gear manufacturers on those panels. And it was the gear manufacturers who, of course, you're talking about the UV light test. They're the ones who fought that removal for a long time. It's sort of, I find it kind of an odd setup that you have this organization, and they're not the only one. I mean, UE does it for electricity, and there are a lot of uh, company, whatever, private sector representatives on all these panels, and these panels are not government panels. The government does accept their recommendations. You're absolutely right about that. But the genesis of it and how these recommendations or regulations come about, I think is a little odd. It's sort of the fox watching the hen house, isn't it? I mean, they all have their own vested interests. So certainly with, the manufacturers, it's to sell PPE, right? And to make sure firefighters don't think their stuff is poisoned. And there was a lot of effort on that, part by the manufacturers. I think, part of the problem is that people I don't know if you could have a government organization setting the standards, because I don't know how, you get people in who really know what you guys know, for example, who, understand what the dangers are and where the risks are. But it's a very odd, I think, regulatory setup. So, Diane had mentioned conflict of interest. I checked with NFPA as I was writing my book. Do they have a standard for conflict of interest? The answer is there isn't one. What do you do with that?
Yeah, Diane mentioned earlier, not so many words, but not to trust the manufacturers. And if anybody's out there, who's still not totally convinced, I challenge you to go back and watch the movie Dark Waters, where a lot of this started. Read the book. And then I'm going to pass it to Diane. For once they get done with that, where should they then turn? What's the proper websites? The Last Call Foundation has a lot of information available.
I wouldn't be here without Kathy Crosby Bell. Yeah,
a
Last Call Foundation.
Yeah, they're a big supporter of the fire service and of this task. So where should the fire service turn to for the right information? Once they watch Dark Waters and realize that we're being miffed by the manufacturers, where should they turn to find out the truth about their PPE?
You have to turn to the IAFF. They have got the greatest, most, and trust me on this. I check everything. So yeah, the people that are working in the science team there, Derek Irwin, Neil McMillan, these are brilliant men. Dr. Danny Wolf from Miami-Dade. Trust me, they are following everything. These are brilliant men. I'm blown away by, their own CV, as you say. But so the IAFF has a great page just devoted to this subject. You can go to my website, Your Turnout Gear in PFOA, because I'm the nerd on this. I have everything that's available. I have all the studies. I have the chronology of all of the events, and all of my Medium articles are on there as well. But you should also watch Burned, Protecting the Protectors, because without Rob Ballot and Mark Ruffalo and Ethereal Films, Elijah, who you've had on the show, and we built such a coalition, environmental working group, and we're just so grateful for everybody that's come along, from the firefighters themselves to the activists, the scientists. The science community thoroughly embraced this when they saw what was going on here. So, it's just tremendous. So,
Diane, where can somebody view Burn now? Is it still in limited release, or can
you can see it?
We can see it now. Can we post a link
Yeah.
on this show?
Oh, Elijah would love you to. So it's on Ethereal Films YouTube page, and you'll get the full video. And if you want any of the documents that they have to go along with it, you can get that off of the Ethereal Films website, because they've got a great toolkit as well. They put a lot of effort into this. So yeah, thank you, Rob Balat and Mark Ruffalo. Yeah.
And I think the moral of this story is really trust no one and ask a lot of questions. And if you're in a position of authority, you should never be offended if somebody's asking you a question. It should be an opportunity to explain your position. So I think that's very important. Miranda, where can somebody get your book about Diane and these 5 great people?
Well, it's not out yet. The publisher is the New Press, and that's thenewpress.com. And there is now an author page, although they're still working on that. And so I think in probably the book's out in May, and I think that around January, there's going to be an opportunity for pre-orders. And trust me, pre-orders are super important. And so I will be coming back and knocking on your door and hoping that I can, give you guys the link and help me get the word out about the book.
Absolutely. Bring it to PJ and I, and we will make sure when the book comes out or you're able to pre-order that we give you a plug. Again, also to the IFF, Ed Kelly has been invited on this show. And besides when somebody just attacks you instead of the merits of the issue, the other thing individuals do is say, oh yeah, sure, and then never make it happen. That's the other time you're on the right track. So Ed Kelly's always been invited on the show. He always told Bobby, oh yeah, I'm coming on, but he's never had the courage to come on. Everybody that comes onto this show has always been treated with respect. And we have some hard questions for Ed Kelly. He has been a hero of lately, but we know he was the treasurer cashing the checks for the chemical industry when they were doing the cancer summits, talking about volleyballs and beach balls. So he would have a fair hearing here, as we've given everybody, and we welcome anybody from the IFF to come on. And we also welcome anybody from NFPA to come on, because currently they're being sued. And this is a place where it's okay to disagree. It's okay to ask the hard questions and put it out there. That's what fire engineering is about, is to give that platform to the fire service. So that's open to everybody. Diane, you are a hero. You can trust a mom. If it wasn't for your persistence, none of this would happen. It wasn't the IFF, it wasn't this individual, that individual. It was because of your sheer persistence. Your husband is a saint. And we would also be remiss, because we talked about some mental health issues today, is that help isn't a 4-letter word. Please, if you're having any issues, reach out and ask for help. We lose more firefighters a year to suicide than we do in line of duty deaths. So there's nothing wrong with asking for help. But if people are getting on you that much, it usually means you're on the right track. PJ?
Yeah, Frank, couldn't have said it any better. Mental health in the fire service is a significant challenge because, especially when the majority of it is underreported, and we need to take care of ourselves. But we need to take care of each other. And I always struggled helping out fellow firefighters because I was always afraid to ask that question. Do you feel like committing suicide? Do you feel like hurting yourself? And it wasn't until I lost a close mentor of mine until I realized that 2 days earlier, I should have asked him if he was contemplating suicide. So don't be afraid to ask the question. Don't be afraid to be there for somebody. Ask the question, but be prepared for the answer you don't want to hear, right? So have the resources available, and then know when you get that answer where to go for help, to help guide them. Sometimes it's just an ear. Sometimes it's just being there for them. Sometimes it's just sharing a cup of coffee, but also have those resources. Because mental health is a significant issue, not just for the fire service, but for our law enforcement partners, our EMS providers, as well as our dispatchers. So mental health is a significant challenge for all of us, and we need to be there for each other. So Frank, thanks for really identifying that tonight. Diane, I never heard the details of those stories. While you let us in behind the curtain on a little bit of that over the years. I'm very, very sorry that you had to go through that and experience that. However, on one hand, I'm very, very deeply sorry, but on the other hand, I'm super happy that you made it over the hump, because your impact to the fire service, you have a legacy within the fire service, unlike many of us will never achieve. Right? We hit little issues. We impact individuals. We impact little issues. There has been no issue in my 30 plus years in the fire service that has been impacted as big as the PFAS issue, and that's because of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. I just have to say it wasn't just me. Y'all know that. We built an army. We built an army from coast to coast. We built.
Diane, there's many villains in this story, and there's only one hero, and that's you. Miranda, I'm going to give you your last word, and then we're going to finish it out with Diane. Go ahead, Miranda. What would you like to tell the fire service?
I would just add to that Diane built an army, but she was the general.
Thank you.
Very, very, very well said. We look forward to seeing your book. I look forward to reading it. Diane, last words of the night. It's been a high honor to have you on the show. You're a great American, and it goes to show you that don't be discouraged, because an individual can make a difference in America. You just have to be persistent, you have to care, and you have to be on the right track, and you had all that. So go ahead.
God put all the right people in our path. This wasn't serendipity. He had the hand in this. Trust me on that.
Very well said. We can't wait to see your memoir and Miranda's book. PJ and Mark Ha, thanks for Mark Ha and Fire Engineering for producing this Humpday Hangout. Mark, take us off, and good night.